We like this new model of campfire side chats because they're a lot more intimate, but they become a lot more intimate if you come closer to where we're sat. So there's still some room in the front rows instead of trying to be cool and staying at the back. Edward, maybe you can start by introducing yourself in a couple sentences. I know that you said we could go very long on a couple of different questions.
Anything.
So let's for the introductory bits, let's try to keep it a bit short.
I'm Edward. I am one of the founders of Knotel, which is a pretty large company right now. Maybe we'll make it even larger. We do flexible workspace, mainly for large companies. So we provide flexible workspace for the Global 2000. You want me to hold the microphone closer?
No.
And I'm an entrepreneur, and I've built several companies. I've worn different hats. I've also invested in a number of businesses, both in Europe and in the US. I was born in the Soviet Union, which no longer exists. I spent some time in Russia, but I haven't been there for quite some time. I live in New York and travel the world.
So before we get to talking about Knotel, when I was doing a bit of research on you, one of the things I saw on your LinkedIn profile was this anecdote about Thales and the fact that he may or may not potentially have invented both options and or one of the two options and futures. And I was quite struck because it seems very random. There was no context at all. And I was wondering if you could give us some context on either why you're such a fan of Thales or why you're such a fan of that anecdote. Maybe tell us the anecdote again, just for people who don't know it.
Yeah, so most people put like short bits and pieces about themselves in the top of their LinkedIn profiles, and I thought that I would put something that I would like to be. So I would have loved to be Thales, because I think that he's amazing in many respects. He was a mathematician, and you've all studied him at school, several theorems, and but he was also a philosopher, and I studied philosophy in school, and I've always thought of the things that I do as something like applied philosophy, and I've since graduating college, I've continued to study philosophy. I read books, I read philosophical books. I try to stay on top of interesting aspects of philosophy. And philosophy in the U.S. is different from the philosophy, and it's different from the philosophical education in Europe. Europe is what is known as continental philosophy, and U.S. is veering more towards analytical. So it's much more math-oriented, driven by logic, and we study predicate calculus, parsing sentences, truth theorems, ideas on modality, and other things like that. So Thales is amazing to me because he was a philosopher, and like you know the phrase, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? That's about him, and someone said it to him, and he decided to apply his knowledge and his thinking abilities to actually making money. And I actually think I think of myself sort of the same way, that it's super interesting to build businesses, but maybe I could have also been an artist, or maybe I could have been a poet, which I was actually a poet, and I decided to build companies because it's a way to apply things that I'm good at to something concrete. And I think with Thales, he did the same thing. He calculated that there will be an amazing crop of olives. And before anyone, he was able to purchase time in the olive mills. And because of that, when this crop appeared, he had the time and he could sell the usage of the olive mills to others and made a lot of money to show the citizens of Miletus, the city where he lived, that you can actually apply knowledge and make money that way. So what he did is he invented both options and futures. So he without money, he bought the, or without completely buying it, he speculated on the crop, and he was able to buy the time in the mills, and then sell it to others. Maybe a long-winded answer.
No, good. A good one. As a funny coincidence, I studied formal logic at university. I'm very curious to hear how you think that your day job now is a form of applied philosophy.
Well, we are surrounded by language. And as you've studied formal logic, you have probably read Wittgenstein. And it's everything we do is about language, except for art, which is not language. It's getting emotional responses through nonverbal communications. And I think that when you parse language, you understand a lot more about it. And a lot of most of our communications is about parsing language. Most of business is about parsing language. A lot of business is coming up with the right metaphors to bring out new ideas, to sort of to inspire people with words. I mean, everything that we do in business is related to people, and people communicate mainly through words. Even when you look for cues in some nonverbal communication, even when you try to read between the lines must exist.
So typically talking about people, one of the things that's most notable about Knotel is how quickly you've grown over the past 4 years, or 4 years of your existence. 4 years, 5 years. So you were 150 18 months ago. You're almost 500 now.
People.
And that's not something that's necessarily easy for founders and managers to go through. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about how the culture has changed, if at all, and how you've adapted to that new role with so many faces you don't know in the company anymore.
Yeah, so I remember when it was just 2 people. Not many people remember that, except, in fact, only 2 people remember that. It's Amol, with whom we founded the company, and I.
Maybe your friends and family.
The friends and family remember, but we didn't tell a lot of people that we were actually doing this thing until it became more successful. The story of Knotel is not really deterministic. It's not like we one day decided to build this company. It's much more iterative. We actually started with building a different business. We're both more technology-oriented software entrepreneurs. He built several successful companies. He was one of the founders of Virgin Mobile, and then built a company called Peak Wireless, which he sold to SoftBank. And I was at the time investing, and I was the founding investor of Delivery Hero, which was an amazing success, and participated in several other companies in Europe and the US. And when we started working together, we started with the idea of building a software company called Notable, with a product called Note, which would allow people to communicate better, for everyone sort of to be on the same page, to have a place where your common notes are stored, and we both thought that we're seasoned guys, and we found a place which was larger than we needed, much larger. Then we invited some friends to share that space with us. Then one of those companies started growing, and ultimately we realized that this strange real estate thing is actually making money and feeding our software business. We thought, well, and we're not really doing anything. Maybe we should take it seriously. Maybe there's something in that. Maybe we, coming from the software world or hardware world, we know something about real estate that others don't. Maybe we can apply our skills to this. So we started taking it. We started thinking about it, and we brought a few people to work with us. And when the company got to, just to come back to your question, when the company got to about 100 people, I still knew everyone. I still knew everyone by name. We interviewed most of the people. Well, both Amol and I would meet with them, and there were some people that came and went, but I think I left New York in February of 16 to spend 6 months in London. We just did a deal with Deskio in Paris, so I would spend some time in Paris. We hired a new team in London. We needed to bring up and develop the London business. So I thought it would make a lot of sense for me to spend time there. And I would come back periodically, but not spend enough time in New York. And the real change was from that February till September when we came back, was that we went from 200 to 400 people. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just that I didn't know some of the people. I didn't know most of the people in the company. And moreover, most of the people didn't know me, which was always funny. I would be in the elevator with someone and ask them what they do, and they ask me what I do. I would joke about something. I would say I'm a janitor. They would believe me. I would walk around the office, pick up trash.
How long did the joke go?
Well, as long as I wanted it to last. But yeah, the transition is from a startup to a more mature company is not every company goes through. So you're never prepared for it. This is like operationally, this is the largest company I've been involved with. I was involved with Delivery Hero, but I wasn't in the office every day. I would go to board meetings and pontificate on what we need to do, help with deals. But it wasn't really that I was in the office and that I was dealing with a lot of people. But you can read as many books as you like on this, or listen to YouTube videos. But you're not prepared for it, because there's nothing that you have not had that experience unless you went through it. And every time, even if you went through something similar, every time it's different because times change, communications change. Even if you did something like that 10 years ago, it will be different now. And most people go through something like that once in their lifetime. So we are hiring people who are much more mature, much more conservative. I talked to some people in New York, and I realized that they're significantly more conservative, a lot less tolerant to risk than I am. Like, wow, this must mean that the company is getting mature, that we're a large company, and people who are more conservative want to work for a company like that. They want predictability. They want planning. They can't just wing it.
Another thing that's been quite characteristic of your growth and story so far is that you've made a lot more acquisitions, or at least acquisitions sooner than a lot of companies that we usually see. And so I was wondering, so some of them have been for more geographic expansion, some seem to be more product driven. I was wondering if that was something that was going to continue, if it was a core part of your strategy, or if it was something that was opportunistic and mostly driven to grow portfolio.
Yeah, so I really believe in acquisitions. I was a part of growing several companies. One of those, the first company that we built through acquisitions was a company we built in Russia called Soup. And it started with the acquisition of this social network called LiveJournal. And then we acquired some sports sites and media sites and news, and we pulled it together into a single vehicle. which very quickly became large and quite successful. And then we did something very similar with Delivery Hero, which actually was built. It was almost a roll-up initially. It was built through acquisitions. And I realized that you're right, indeed. Many companies start acquisitions later, and almost too late. I think it's a very important instrument for companies to have in their arsenal. It's almost like a muscle that you need to train. How do you find companies? How do you go about integrating them? How do you build the culture that encompasses both the company that acquires and the acquirer? How do you build a common culture? What is that? What is the process of this M&A? And ultimately, whatever the companies are, whether it's 42 Floors that we acquired, which is the large search engine for commercial real estate, or Deskio, or a company called Ahoy in Germany, all of these ultimately boil down to people. Yes, it is about markets. Yes, it's about market opportunities, but it's ultimately, in order to make this acquisition successful, or in order to make any deal successful, you are dealing with people, and you need to make sure that you like them and you want the people to stay, and you can find the right ways of motivating them and motivating yourself to work together. So I think that just like you're incubating something, you're sometimes also iterating, like growing it. You want to scale things or industrialize. You also need to learn how to integrate. And acquisition is that. Acquisitions teach you how to develop that muscle.
So when I asked you about acquisitions right away, you pointed to the Delivery Hero story, and I think that's what makes you. Well, one of the things that makes you special as a founder is that you spent so much time investing prior to building this company, and as you said, this is the biggest company that you've been involved with operationally. And I was wondering if there were other things, other decisions you've made at Knotel that were driven by things that you observed in other companies you might have invested, Delivery Hero, Tradeshift, where you're like, we really fucked that up, I'm not going to do it this time, or on the contrary, that was great, I'm just going to copy and paste because it worked so well last time.
Yeah, I don't think you can just copy and paste, but you can be inspired by things.
Or copy and paste, conditional formatting.
Yeah, you can steal. You know that some people borrow and genius steals. You always want to steal and adopt and make it yours. But in stealing, you really do need to make it yours in order for it to stick. And with Delivery Hero specifically, I think that Knotel probably would not have existed without WeWork, because WeWork broke and went through a lot of walls for us, both physically and metaphorically. But also without Delivery Hero, which taught me, if Delivery Hero taught me one thing, which I translated into Knotel, it's the thing about understanding competition and understanding the market. And when we were building Delivery Hero, we never thought that we had strong competitors in any market. We would always believe that the market is so large that the main competitor is the telephone. Delivery Hero is a large online food ordering platform, and its main competitor is the telephone. That's still the main way people order food. And if your competitor is not innovative, and the phone is not very innovative, if your competitor is weak, you want a competitor like that. Because if you have 10% of the market online, that means 90% of the market is not online, and you want to go after that 90% and make your mark there. It's easier than competing in the 10%. So when we were thinking about Knotel, we knew about WeWork. WeWork, all of a sudden, I started thinking about this strange real estate thing that we were working on, and I went into WeWorks, and I thought, well, it's interesting. They're doing this shared space business, and people seem to enjoy it, and but they're going after such a small part of the market, because most people don't co-work, they actually work. Most people work for large companies. large businesses like the global 2000 spend $3 trillion a year on workspace. It's an amazing market. If you look at the whole market, it's probably more than 5 trillion a year. Global 2000 and the long tail. And that market is more than all of IT combined. So companies spend more on workspace than they spend on all the technology that they acquire, which is mind-boggling. And I thought, well, WeWork is probably going after that 1% of the market, or maybe they've penetrated that 1%. They're not 1% of anything, anywhere. So why don't we go after the other 99%? And the other 99% is the long-term lease. So our competitor became the long-term lease. That product that doesn't innovate, that weak competitor that will be displaced. So you want to go into markets where there's no or little competition, because you can become big there fast.
So it feels like so WeWork's approach was to start with freelancers and startups as a way to go to markets and then grow with them, and then as they built their reputation with those companies, potentially bring in more corporate clients. And so now you're probably more head-to-head with them on some deals than you were even just a couple of years ago. So I was wondering if that had changed your strategy, or if the long-term lease, I mean, at the end of the day, maybe they're 0.5% or even 0.25, and the long-term lease is still the main competitor. And then, so that was first question. And the second is more in terms of your fund, like you were on a fundraising roadshow a year ago, at the same time as WeWork was rumored to be preparing for its IPO. Even if you weren't exactly in the same market, that was probably question number 3 or 4 in quite a lot of the investor meetings that you had. And I was wondering how you navigated that, and if you ever had to change your strategy, or at least your narrative.
Great questions. So we saw ourselves sort of competing with WeWork, but in a way which was very strange. We immediately realized that WeWork doesn't have a good product for larger teams. So when we launched with the idea that we would serve teams of 20 people or 30 people. We thought maybe up to 100. And then very quickly, like within the same year, we got teams of 100 and 200 because that product didn't exist in the market, and WeWork didn't have it. And specifically, they didn't have a product for dedicated teams. And we had maybe 2 years of head start. And then they launched a project within WeWork called WeWork HQ, which was providing dedicated space. It's still a small product within WeWork, probably less than 10%. We're much larger in that market, much more advanced. And we saw them in some deals. We would lose very few deals to them. We would still lose, most of the deals we would lose to the long-term lease, or some cheap sublease, or some expensive sublease, whatever. We would not lose deals to WeWork or Regus. We never saw Regus in deals, or other companies in the co-working space. And but when we were pitching the company, and indeed, in every meeting, there would be a question about WeWork. And a year ago, when we were talking to potential investors, everyone would say that we will fail, that they will win. They're so much larger, they're so much better capitalized. They have SoftBank behind them. They have amazing momentum. Everyone is talking about them. There's blah 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 blah, and we would say we are in a different market. We have a different product. We're saying the same thing over and over again for 2 years, and it felt like no one was listening. It was actually a very weird feeling that when WeWork didn't go public, all of a sudden that super loud drumbeat stopped, and people started paying attention and said, "Oh, that's what you do. Wow, that makes so much sense. Amazing, amazing. Why didn't they do it? Like your model is so much better, so much more capital efficient." And we were saying that we're 5 times more capital efficient or 10 times more capital efficient by different metrics. And when people have a certain view in their minds, it's very difficult to change their minds unless they want to do it.
One of the sort of arguments that was put forward when people were trying to justify the WeWork thesis was that what they were building, even if some of the locations were taking quarters and quarters to become break even, was an incredible supply, and that ultimately having all those leases for the relatively long term was the ultimate moat. It was owning a lot of supply. So I was wondering if one, that was something that you can see, and two, if in Knotel's growth the real constraint is finding good supply, and then once you have the spaces, poof, they go. And your real challenge is convincing landlords, whatever the deal, that you're the person or the company to partner with.
So initially we thought that indeed supply was the constraint, and it probably was the constraint, because when we were just 2 guys with nothing, we would come to these old men that own New York buildings and say, give us a lease in your building, and they would say, why? Sometimes they would be ruder. They wouldn't kick us out, but they would just shrug their shoulders and say, why? What are you doing here? Who are you guys? What guarantees would you give me? Where's the money? And but there were some people that would take a chance on us, and they did. And in the process, we took a lot of space, and sometimes we made mistakes, and we didn't know a lot about real estate. We didn't know that. We didn't know how to negotiate on the deposits, and what capex to provide, and what TIs to ask for. So we were learning in the process, and I think that at this point we realized that supply is not really the constraint. The constraint is the efficiency of capital usage. It's how effectively we can use cash to match the demand with supply. Because if you talk about WeWork having lots of space, WeWork maybe has 2% of New York, of like New York real estate, and probably maybe some small percentage of London, maybe some small percentage of San Francisco. We have close to 0.5% of New York, maybe a little more, and maybe the whole flexible and co-working and the shared space market has 4% of New York. That means there's 96% left. We're not supply constrained. It's a market where we lose deals because we cannot match the demand with existing supply in time. We cannot turn that space into a flexible product fast enough, reacting to the needs of the market. So I think that supply is very important, and we work with real estate owners. Obviously, some of them are partners, some of them are colleagues. We build our businesses on their inventory. At the same time, we are in the business for our customers. We're in the business because they need certain flexibility, and they are driving the change in the market. They're telling us, and they're telling the owners that they need something different. They don't want long-term leases. They want to have full service. They want the spaces to be tailored. They want things to be done faster, and they want things to be done cheaper. And this is what we try to deliver. So the constraints are only within us. It's really our efficiency.
And when you're talking about the markets, you mentioned New York and San Francisco and London. And I read a quote by your co-founder saying nobody makes money in Cairo, as a, I guess, sort of pun on where some people were trying to expand. And so I was wondering how you thought about new markets to launch, and where, if there are any in which you're not yet present, which one they'd be.
Yeah, I sent a link to that interview to a friend of mine who works in a large private equity fund, and he responded within like 5 seconds. I made money in Cairo twice. So I think that what Amol meant is that we will be very careful in choosing our markets. So we don't want to be in 200 different cities. We started with the idea that 50% of the global economy is happening in top 30 cities around the world. Maybe it's top 50 cities around the world. These large global centers like New York and Paris and London and Tokyo and San Francisco and LA. There are some of them in China and general in Asia and Southeast Asia. Some in Europe, some in the US, or in North America. Even some in South America. But there aren't many of them. You know all these cities. Regis is in hundreds of cities. I don't even know the names of those cities. I've never been there. Their business is very, very different. And I think WeWork followed that strategy of spreading themselves very thin and being a different type of a platform. And WeWork and Regis and other co-working players operate very differently. They can go into a city, open one location, and then try to prove unit economics within that one location. For us, unit economics are not on the location basis, they're on the city basis. We need to have many locations to provide flexibility because we provide dedicated spaces to companies. If we can't have one location anywhere, it just, that's not our business. It's like having one Uber in a city.
Another sort of question around the model has to do, so there's two aspects. So either you do revenue share with landlords or you take the lease on yourself. And so obviously when you take on the lease yourself, there's some form of engagement and you agree to pay some sort of price. So if there's a big price change, you can end up with a pretty big liability. That's not necessarily that easy to fill. On the other hand, so that's typically if there's a crisis. On the other hand, if there's a crisis, a lot of people will be looking for more flexible and less constraining solutions. And so I was wondering how excited you were for the next economic downturn, at least as far as Knotel's business is concerned, and how you thought those two counterweight each other.
So I don't crave for a global crisis because I think that it will be difficult for everyone. But I think that our business performs well in localized crises. And we have seen it 3 times now. We saw it in London with Brexit, where we launched London around the same time as Brexit happened, or maybe we're thinking about London, but whatever. Most of our London presence has been at the times of Brexit, and that's a big transition for the country. It's a big transition for CEOs who are launching businesses there or have businesses there to think of what they do and try to manage their cash and manage their decisions based on much shorter term thinking. So taking change into account, and you constantly and with these crises is when you need to adapt to change. So that was one, and we did very well in London. And actually, most flex operators did very well in London because instead of taking a long-term lease, companies want to have flexibility. They want to. No one says that they want to have less flexibility. Everyone says that they want to have more, always. Flexibility is seen as a good thing. Optionality, ability to change, make decisions faster. Then we saw the same thing in Brazil. Very differently. Brazil was in a crisis, and then with the change in government, the economy started picking up, and we saw people wanting to get into our flex spaces. And we did a management deal there with a large private equity group.
that case, more pro-cyclical. In that case, more pro-cyclical.
Well, we launched. It was already going well, and then it was almost like a tidal wave of demand coming in. And then the big crisis for us was the thing that happened with WeWork. It was like a small nuclear bomb blowing up next to us, and that shock wave catapulted us somewhere, and we landed, and then we waited for the dust to settle, and we realized that we actually landed in a pretty good spot.
So a couple of questions before I let everyone else ask some questions. One has to do with the different products that you launched or offerings that you launched on the site. So the core offering is flexible office space. You have a product called Geometry, which offers sort of leasing on furniture. And then in a bit more tangential manner, you have Baya, if I pronounce it correctly. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your strategic thinking around product, and also if there were other avenues that you're thinking to explore.
So when we were younger, we were experimenting a lot with different approaches, and one thing that we discovered in building spaces is that we save money when we replace construction with assembly, and we thought it's a good thing in general to be able to reuse things. It's a sustainable way to build, sort of the green side of flex. And we thought in general that flex drives this green thinking, because you right-size the businesses, you lose less energy when you use only the space that you need. And ultimately, we split the business into, logically, not in any other way, logically we split it into two areas. Three areas, but two are well developed. One area is matching demand to supply. So 42 Floors has been super instrumental in that. The matching engine. 42 Floors has the largest database of listings, real estate listings in the world, and we enrich that with a lot of other data, and are able to automate a lot of our decision-making processes, or at least expedite it. And so we're able to match customer demand with supply faster and provide space. That's one thing. And then once we have that match, how do we go around, or how do we go about getting that space launched? And that's where Geometry comes in. And Geometry has several facets. One of those facets is how we engage with customers once that match has been made. What do they need besides the space itself? They need that space to be built out in a certain way. They need that space to be productive. So I learned from a large brokerage that there's this magical 550, 500 numbers in office. You pay $50 a square foot for space. You pay $5 a square foot for maintenance related to that space, like electricity and security and water and other stuff. And you pay $500 a square foot for salaries of people that work in those spaces. So you might as well focus on that 500 and make sure the people are more successful and more productive. And if they are more successful and more productive, that other side, that office, that $55 is free. Gensler says that they make their spaces, they make employees in the spaces they design 20% more productive. I can't argue with that number, it's their number. But I think that even 10% would be great. And so a part of Geometry is workplace strategy. It's helping companies design the best solutions for people to communicate and for people to be more productive in their environments. Then it's assembly of the office using different types of modular furniture, movable walls, different meeting rooms that arrive flat packed and are assembled within hours, and things like foam booths. So using an open space office and then designing it in a way where it has privacy and has different working areas for focused work, for some collaborative work, for social events like this. So making the space truly flexible. So not only flexibility in terms, but also flexibility in how the space is built. And then the third aspect of geometry is actually tapping into the global supply chains and developing that stuff ourselves. So designing it and making the best phone booth on the market. So there are lots of phone booths on the market. I think we made the best one in terms of sound quality and air quality. Because you don't want to walk into a booth and then after someone spent an hour there. So in our booth, the air circulates every minute, for example. So you always have sort of fresh air. So small things like that. And then the last thing you talked about is Baya, which is our data product. We pulled it out of the idea of 42 floors. Maybe we can take the same thing and propagate it globally. And we wanted to do it through a consortium of partners. And this is something that's still working. It's still a startup. There's a separate team working on it, and I think we'll get it done in different markets. So Buy is more for markets where for markets that don't have great information about real estate.
So typically not the markets that Knotel is core focused on.
Well, I actually don't know if France has great information about commercial real estate, or Germany.
So
New York does,
yeah.
But there are also markets in America that don't.
Another question had to do with, so earlier when I was talking to you, I mentioned the fact that your leases on average had gone up, so now they're 2 years on average, and I said, does that change anything to the status of you providing flex office space, right, being flex? And you said, it depends what you call flex, and so now's my opportunity to ask you, what do you mean by flex? So
I thought I just explained it, but I can try again. What you meant is that customers sign up with us for longer periods of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So average agreement that customers enter into at Knotel right now is 2 years, and they renew. We have almost 100% revenue renewal rates, which actually is normal, because if you look at the relationships that you have with other providers, like look at your wireless phone bill or your wireless phone provider. You sign an agreement for a year, but then you stick with them for 10. When we started our business in Japan, I found out that average lease in Japan is 2 years, but average stay is 8 to 10. And we're seeing, I think we're seeing something like that, or we'll see something similar in our business, where I want to move away from the idea of term completely. Like it should be just evergreen. Large companies don't want to move. It's cumbersome, but if they have a partner that can help them find space and actually make that process seamless, then they're just a part of the platform. We become their office cloud, and that's the idea. It's almost similar to what Amazon did with AWS. They did it with data. We want to do it with workspace.
Last question, just so we go full circle. You mentioned that you were a poet. So first of all, I want to question you on the tense. Why did you stop writing poetry, or did you stop writing poetry? And then last, for once I get the opportunity to ask questions about fiction rather than non-fiction. And so I was wondering, given that you wrote and maybe still do write poetry, what it is that you're reading.
So I was writing, I was indeed writing poetry since I was 12, and I was pretty good at it. Rimbaud stopped writing when he was maybe 18.
Well, he died really young.
No, but he became he became a merchant after. That story was also quite inspirational. You can write poetry and then you can stop, because you realize that you've already written something that's really good, and if you have, you don't want to write something that's worse. You always want to do something. You always want to write something that's better, and if it's not happening, you don't want to do it. So if it starts happening again, I'll be happy to start taking dictation. But as long as I'm applying myself to something else, maybe my ears are closed to listening. Maybe time will pass and I'll start writing something else. But for now, I'm applying metaphors to Knotel. And as far as reading, I mean, we did talk about this. I consume a lot of nonfiction, but I don't think it's really reading. It's just understanding the concepts, maybe understanding some examples. And reading nonfiction is like reading newspapers. It's timely. It's often applied. You read the stuff that you understand the stuff that you know, that reinforces some of your understanding, that you're often prepared to consume. And I read a lot more fiction, and I think that in reading fiction, you live through the experiences of the characters, and you don't need to. The more fiction you read, the less you need to experience yourself, in the sense that you learn from your mistakes. But maybe if you read a book and you understand the motivations of that character, you spend time with that character, living them and developing, seeing how they develop, you actually almost make those mistakes with them. You live through those mistakes, and you can internalize them. So I think reading fiction gives you great education, almost as your own experience. And right now I'm rereading The Portrait of Dorian Gray. And I think Oscar Wilde is an amazing voice that's now completely missing in the world.
He has some pretty amazing lines. I think, was it
and vile.
Lord Henry is one of the funniest characters.
Yes, he is. I don't think we can quote him on YouTube.
No. So now you get to ask questions. I think we have a mic that's quite practical and that can be thrown. Be gentle in throwing it. Who wants to ask question number one? Here you go.
Hi. 42 Floors had a really interesting business model, charging a commission, right? And I think you guys changed it after. And what was the rationale behind the acquisition of 42 Floors? And also, how are you looking into small commercial real estate and retail to expand into that?
So I think that 42 Floors was inspired by two companies. Companies like Zillow, two types of companies. Companies like Zillow or Zoopla, which index residential real estate data, and then they list brokers and make money through advertising or commissions. And on the one side, that's on the one side, and CoStar on the other side. And CoStar accumulates a lot of that data by hand. And I think the commercial real estate market just works differently. The contracts are much longer. It's much more relationship-based. There's a lot less that happens on this transactional side. And 42 Floors had an amazing team, great technology, great data, but it had an interesting business model, and interesting may be the right word for it. It didn't have a super successful business model. And we became the business model for that company or for that technology. We became the monetization engine. And when we met with Jason Friedman, who is the founder of 42 Floors and now the CTO of Knotel, we felt like we could speak the same language, and he felt, more importantly, that we understood what he was trying to do. So it was a very quick decision on both sides. We understood we wanted to work with each other, and Took us several months to get the deal done, but I think it's a super successful relationship, and what he was able to do with a small tech team, both on the data side and on the technology process side, is amazing. And I think we probably should be more public about it, and disclose a lot more, like be open about the types of development that we do and what we can do in the commercial real estate market. On the second question on small brokerages, we do work with a number of small brokerages. Small brokerages have a problem where they don't represent large buildings, and they typically don't represent large clients. But they do represent some form of, well, they do represent some of our customers, and we are happy to work with these brokers to have them to market their space, to have them market our space, and to work with their clients. Absolutely, everyone is welcome.
Next question.
Hi. Do you consider yourself more as a prop tech company or real estate company? Like how important is the tech in your business?
I think that we obviously touch real estate, and it would be stupid to deny that we don't. At the same time, we are technology driven. Like Amazon is a good example of a company that works in retail, but has built lots of invisible technologies in the back end to expedite orders, to make sure that their catalog works well, to make sure that internal logistics are perfectly aligned. And then they, from their internal operations, they were able to spit out AWS, which is a pure technology business. So we haven't done that yet. So we're not a pure technology company. I think the technology company is always a company that makes money on selling its technology. So we're not making money on selling technology. We're using technology to make our processes better. Just like many other companies, I think Uber uses their technology to make their processes better. Airbnb uses their technology to make their processes better and to make our experiences better. So I also think the definition of what the company is and what the markets are also changes. Like when we started Knotel, the word PropTech didn't exist. It appeared around the same time. Like we thought we talked about it as real estate tech or CRE tech, and then PropTech became this overarching term. And maybe in 5 years it'll be completely different, and we'll talk about PropTech companies being only companies that affect only technology companies, and Knotel or WeWork or others, all the co-living companies will not fall into that space. But I think ultimately I think of myself as a technology entrepreneur or technology-driven entrepreneur. I still don't think that I'm a real estate entrepreneur. We don't own real estate. We don't really think like most of the real estate market, but we are working with the real estate market and changing it. And I think you can only determine what the company is in retrospect. You can project some things, but looking backwards is much easier.
Hi, Edward. Thank you for coming and speak to us. I had a question. Knotel's current offer in France is somehow a way around traditional real estate contracts that are very rigid. Aren't you afraid that traditional landlords might push back and try to, forbid maybe this kind of offer?
Well, I think it would not be in their interests to forbid something like that. So to forbid what we do. In fact, they should only embrace it because this is what the market is asking for. If you don't want to be in the market, then you can try to avoid it. But I think that we want to be friendly with owners, and we are. Ultimately, we partner with them on their properties, and we want them to be successful. We want to provide the right services to them to enable them to deliver flex, because we don't see them delivering flex as competition. We see them delivering flex as a way for us to better service our customers. The more availability of flex there is, the easier it is for us to match the demands of our companies with existing supply. So I would welcome more and more owners adopting flex and then listing it with us, coming to us and saying, "Look, we have this flex solution. Would it work as a Knotel? Can we partner with you?" I would only welcome that. We work with large companies. We're some of the largest companies in the world, and they want global solutions. And real estate is inherently a local market. So there isn't anyone in the world who owns a significant percentage of global real estate. There are some companies that own a lot in a specific locale, but they don't own almost anything in neighboring cities. You look at the largest landlord in New York, which is SL Green, they don't own anything anywhere else. Or Vornado or Related, they own very little, like bits and pieces here and there, but there isn't anyone who can provide a global solution. And I think we've built a global platform that is being adopted by these large businesses because of convenience, because they can get things fast, because they can flex up and down, because it's a solution that's tailored to their needs, and it's a full service offering. And ultimately, because only as a global solution we can deliver them a lower total cost of ownership than they can do themselves. So I ultimately want to make owners successful, want them to work with us, and want them to do more flex rather than less.
Hi. So I wanted to know what was or still is your biggest challenge regarding your business model while expanding in different cities worldwide? For example, is it like local legislations, for example? I don't know.
I think that our company changes every 6 months. We try to constantly reevaluate our assumptions, to constantly reevaluate the processes that we use, and have an iterative approach to building the business. We don't always know everything. We don't know that we're right. We want to experiment, and if something sticks, we push through. And I think the biggest challenge for any company, including Knotel, is hiring the right talent. It's bringing people that would be driven to succeed, bringing in people that would fit into the culture that we're developing in the company, bringing people that share in the vision, and that have the ability to execute. It always boils down to people. And I think that was, and will continue to be the biggest challenge. It's just that the challenge is different at different stages of the company's development. When you're growing from 2 people to 20 people, you need different types of teams to come along. When you're growing from 500 to 1,000 people, once again, the people that are joining are completely different. They're already joining a large company. They want the processes to be there, but they still need to fit into the same mold that we've originally created. And I think we're super lucky to have stumbled upon the right product market fit and also the right culture, where Amal and I have a very good relationship. We almost don't need to speak. we understand each other. We come up with similar ideas around the same time. So when we tell ideas to each other, it takes a second, and it clicks. So, and we love it when people around us click the same way.
There's a question here.
Hi, my name is Dauphine, and thank you for the talk earlier. I had a question that is a bit related to what was said earlier with the relationship between global and local. From what I see from an external point of view, the websites of the various companies you've acquired, they are still different. So how do you articulate what you were talking about, so the local aspect of real estate and the fact of offering a global product and a global platform?
Yeah, so I think that real estate will continue to be local. It's the business of local companies and local owners. Real estate is an asset. It's it's one of the largest, maybe it's the second, after debt, it's the second largest, or after cash, it's the second largest asset class. And we need to be cognizant of that. For many people, it's a store of value. It's they invest in real estate to get yield from it. And we want to have the culture that encompasses that, but at the same time, we're in this business because of our customers, and many of these customers have global ambitions. And because we are global, because we work with these companies, we want to bring that idea of a global platform to the owners. So I think that we're not challenging their assumptions, we're aiding them. We want to bring them. We want to bring the owner mentality into the 21st century, into this network way of thinking. That I have a customer, or there's a customer in my space. It is being serviced by Knotel, and then there's someone in Tokyo or in Delhi that is also servicing the same customer that also has the same customer in at Knotel but using my real estate. So having these people be a part of the global network, I think is important, and understanding that they work with a partner that is global and is able to bring them global demand.
Have you seen big variations in the demands that some of your clients made in specific regions? So like, did you have to shift some stuff when you were helping Brazilian clients versus French clients versus New York clients?
So right now, most of what we do is driven by customer demand. Customers go shopping with us. They say, "Oh, you did such a good job in San Francisco. Why don't we go to Amsterdam together? Or why don't we go to Brussels? Or why don't we go to Dublin or somewhere else?" And because we are in more and more cities, so we're right now in 17 or 18 cities. I'm still trying to figure out how to count some of the offshoots. We get demand from each one of those locations. So Parisian companies or French companies want to come and work with us in New York. Or large multinationals that start working with us in Paris want to work with us in Dublin or Amsterdam or Sao Paulo. I think our strategy continues to be to service the customer. And once we discovered that we don't need to take property speculatively, that we have these customer relationships and customers are supportive of what we do, and we can deliver a better service, then that change in the strategy was so fundamental that we'll just keep riding that wave until we come up with something else, something even better.
Last question.
Last question.
Hello. If it is not too obscure, how does your capital model changed over the time? Your cash flows, your future investments, if it is like a big part of your planning, financial?
Yeah, so very good question, because it did change. Many things didn't change, many things didn't change fundamentally. They were tweaked here and there, but we had certain assumptions initially about how we need to take space and what it will cost us, and what it will cost us from the CapEx perspective, from deposit perspective, from our operational perspective, from customer acquisition costs, and so on. And when this thing happened, and a lot of it was driven by what was happening in the market, by the fact that there was WeWork, they were in a land grab, they were growing super fast, taking property, and every time we would be in a property deal, the owner or the broker would tell us, if you don't take that property, WeWork will. They're paying $2 more than you are. You need to make the decision now. Give us more deposit. Give us this and that, and we will not give you anything in return, because if you don't do this, there will be WeWork that will take it. Well, since October, no one has said that. So, and that changed the business. Obviously, it changed the business for them, but it also changed the business for us and for everyone who's doing coworking as well, because we can now grow at our own pace, or we can set the pace at which we want to grow, and we can determine how we allocate capital, and we've become significantly more efficient. Like over the last few months, we have reworked our business plan, and it became. We were already very capital efficient from what I thought. We were much more efficient than WeWork when we looked at their numbers, like 5 to 10 times more efficient. And I think in the last few months, in reworking our business plans, we shaved off 200 million in capital needs before we get to profitability, and still get to same or very similar numbers in 2024 in terms of growth and EBITDA. So. We will test those assumptions. We will reevaluate, and maybe in another 6 months we'll become even more efficient, or maybe we'll see that something is not working well. But we were able to change our business because market conditions have changed, and I think it's very important for a company to be able to adapt to changing market conditions, to listen to the market and make decisions very fast. And the larger you are, the larger the ship that you're steering, the harder it is to make those decisions fast. And I'm amazed that we're able to really change these things in a matter of, at least on top, make those changes in a matter of weeks, not months, and then align our thinking with the rest of the company also very quickly. And one of the reasons we're able to do these things is because the company is very dispersed. So markets make their own decisions. Markets are driven by either entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial managers that are running their own small companies. Like London is its own small business. Paris is definitely its own smaller business, or smaller than Knotel. But they all come together into a single holistic organism that functions well. And just like Amol and I understand each other quickly, we also understand that we can communicate in the same way with our market leaders, and very quickly send thoughts in, very quickly get feedback, and get reactions, and get to decisions. And ultimately, my advice to all entrepreneurs is to get to decisions faster.
Whatever those decisions may be.
Well, speed is important. You want to speed is important for many reasons, because if you go fast, you're able to iterate fast, and you're able to see what works and what doesn't. And increases in speed lead to qualitative results, or qualitative changes. I mean, a computer is ultimately just a counting machine. It's an abacus, but it's a very, very fast abacus.
No further questions? Maybe one last question and then we're done.
Hi, thanks a lot. According to you, with the arrival of WeWork and Knotel, what do you think will be the job of a real estate asset manager tomorrow?
Oh, that's my favorite question. I'm so glad you asked it. Didn't I say that we want to make our customers successful? So I have this dream of making heads of corporate real estate or asset managers or office managers successful and making them more important in their organizations than they are now. And it's not a completely baseless dream because I saw the same example with IT managers. IT managers 15, 20 years ago were not liked by many people. Things didn't work, Wi-Fi would fail, you couldn't integrate your data, you couldn't bring your iPhone to work. Well, that was 13 years ago, or 12 years ago, something like that. And now everything sort of works. No one is complaining about IT. That stopped. And that stopped because technology has grown, has matured, and also because a lot of what they do has been outsourced to cloud providers. A lot of your data is in the cloud and can be integrated that way. You can reach your data from anywhere. You don't need to reinstall operating systems and update all the data on your computer. You don't need a server rack in your office. All of it is in the cloud. And we want to build a similar type of an office cloud, which would allow heads of real estate or facilities managers or real estate directors to be more successful. And the change from on-premise data to the cloud also led to the change from these IT managers to them becoming CIOs. They became C-level executives that have a seat on the table, that have a voice in the company, that lead the company's data strategy and, in general, information strategy. And I think in the same way, we can enable those heads of real estate to be C-level executives, like chief workplace officers, and allow them to have more important roles in the organization and make decisions that determine the productivity of the employees in the spaces that companies occupy and operate.
Edward, thanks so much for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
Hope to see you soon.
Que la famille.